So today, I want to talk about informar through fake news. And here you see two examples of fake news. The WhatsApp message that was incorrect about the source of forest fires in Chile. And here you see another story that claims that Greta Thunberg is the granddaughter of George Soros. This is clearly a doctored photo. So these are two clear examples of what's called fake news. And here you see how journalists define fake news, right? News that are intentionally and verifiably false and could mislead readers. Now, we're told that fake news is so dangerous to democracy because it breeds confusion, right? And affects elections. So here you see one of the most popular fake news stories in the 2016 US elections, right? The Pope endorses Trump. Right? Now, it's because of this that the Oxford English dictionaries argued that 2016, the word of the year was post-truth, right? So post-truth it describes an era relating to or denoting circumstances in which objective facts are less influential in shaping public opinion than appeals to emotion and personal belief, right? And so the argument is that post-truth, we don't care about facts. And because of this, we're all cynical. So people argue that fake news is so dangerous because whether or not you believe it, it makes you distrust everything, right? It makes you distrust all democratic organizations, right? But we also have to realize that fake news isn't just political, it's also a business. So a lot of the fake news in the 2016 elections, including the story that the Pope endorsed Trump, actually came from a small town in Macedonia. And teenagers made for them a huge amount of money by figuring out the difference between Facebook and Google ads. So if this is fake news, what should we do? Well, the first response is to come up with corrections, to figure out what's true and what's not true, and come up with lists and disseminate those. So this is BuzzFeed's list of the most popular fake news in 2016. Now, this is important, but there's a problem with this, right? So first of all, corrections are too late and too few, right? So there's only a few fact-checking sites, but there's a whole global network of disinformation sites that are constantly changing their URLs as well as their tactics. The second thing is that corrections don't reach the same audience, right? So more people tweet rumors than they retweet corrections, and often entirely different audiences receive the fake news story and receive the correction. Right? The third problem is that focusing on fake news can provoke cynicism as well as calls for censorship. Right? So a lot of political leaders are calling the free press fake news in order to shut them down. And four, most stories aren't so clearly fake or real, right? They're usually a mixture of both. So consider this recent article, a wonderful article on Frances Arnold. Now, this article actually gets her personal details wrong. But the reason it does is because it drew from a Wikipedia page that was also incorrect. In fact, if you go to the Nobel Prize official site, it has her wrong hometown, which is why nobody really knows where Frances Arnold was born. Right? So it's because of all this that people have said, ditch fake news. Ditch the term fake news, and instead, let's use these terms, right? So misinformation talks about the inadvertent spread of fake news. Disinformation talks about things that are deliberately spread. And viral junk content farming, which is really my favorite term, emphasizes that what's important isn't just content, it's circulation, right? So a lot of the point of this thing is to saturate social networks. So all you get is this. Now, this is certainly important, but here's the question. Is it enough? So all of this assumes that if people just had the correct information, everything would be okay. But there are problems with this. For instance, debunking a story keeps it alive, right? So just a show of hands, how many of you learned of either of these fake news stories via corrections or the news, rather than receiving it firsthand? Exactly. And this is also why conspiracy theories are so hard to kill. It took 7 years and a lawsuit before Alex Jones, who's the host of InfoWars, finally admitted that the Sandy Hook massacre was real. So this was the massacre in which someone went into an elementary school, right, and killed a bunch of kids. And even to this day, parents are contacted by people, and they're asked, why are you a crisis actor? Why are you faking this? But you'll notice that he blames his lies on the trauma due to the lying media. As well, what people have shown is that if you tell somebody who thinks something's false and really believes it, that something is fake, it'll just make them believe it more. So the classic case is anti-vaxxers. So those people who believe that vaccination is bad for them and their children, if you tell them, give them the scientific information and say, look, vaccines are good for you, they'll just become more entrenched in their position. So this is commonly called confirmation bias, belief bias, or backfire effect. But as well, a lot of people don't care if something's correct or incorrect, right? They spread it because, for instance, they think it's funny, right? And a lot of times, satire is mistaken for truth. So given all this, what can we do? How can we approach this? So, that was very dramatic. It was leading up to the point. Okay. So, what can we do? Okay. Well, the first thing we have to do, thank you, interference, is to realize that fake news isn't new. In fact, many historians have shown fake news is older than real news, right? And so, Pulitzer, for instance, was a yellow journalist. And he and Hearst are actually blamed for causing the Spanish-American War. And Pulitzer created the Pulitzer Prize, which is given to the best journalism in the United States, in order to atone for his sins. The other thing we have to realize is that concentrating on whether or not something's correct can be a way of avoiding the question, is this right or not? So for instance, concentrating on this, did the article get her first husband's name right, actually avoids the question, why are so many pages about female scientists filled with personal information? Do we really need to know about all their marriages? What is this thing that drives this, right? So, again, given all this, what can we do? Okay. So here's what we're working on. Here's our question. So what if, without letting go of the importance of verification, we took on that really difficult question of authenticity? Okay? Think about authenticity. So how many times have you read something that's fictional, or watched a film that is fictional, or even Korean, and nonetheless found it to be true? And what's important is that the 2016 elections weren't just called the fake news elections, they were also called the authenticity elections. And we have to remember that fact is different than truth, is different than authenticity. So fact comes from the Latin term facere, which is to do. Truth and trust share the same roots. And it actually comes from the Anglo-Saxon word for belief, right? So post-truth, in other words, comes before our normal definitions of truth. Truth has always been about belief, right? And authentic shares the same roots as author and authoritarian. It's a notion that somehow it's the self that does something. It's about agency. So what's important, in other words, is that fake news isn't bad because it makes people skeptical, right? If you want a thriving democracy, you need skepticism. You need critical thought. You need to come to trust democratic institutions because you question them, not because you blindly accept them, right? So that's not the problem. The problem is when skepticism leads you to even more dubious and fake beliefs, right? So if you move from CNN to Alex Jones, this is a problem, right? So what we're trying to do in our group in Canada, and I must say, I just moved to Canada, so wonderful. It is amazing to be outside the US right now. Okay. So what we're trying to do is we're asking ourselves why and under what circumstances, technical, social, cultural, do people find any piece of information to be true regardless of its facticity? And so one of the things that we're looking at is the ways in which social networks operate through micro-targeting, right? Through creating echo chambers, right? So they take what you think they think is some sort of weird or secret belief of yours, and they put you together with people who they think is like you. This is called homophily. Homophily is the notion that similarity breeds connection. Now, the problem with this is that this means that polarization isn't a side effect, it's the goal. The goal is to polarize society, to create these echo chambers. And this makes sense because the very notion of homophily, this is where the US is embedded in everything, right? The notion of homophily comes from mid-century investigations of biracial yet segregated public housing. So sociologists were studying two projects. One was all of white people in New Jersey, and the other one was Hilltown, which was a biracial yet segregated housing place. So there was one building with only black residents, one building with only white residents. And so what they did was they did this huge questionnaire. And they asked everybody many questions, including, do you think black and white people should live together in housing projects? And secondly, do you think that black and white people in the housing project they live in get along? And they also asked the question, who are your 3 closest friends? Okay? So they argued, okay, so if you think that black and white people should live in the same housing project and they get along, you're liberal. If you don't, you're illiberal. And if you think that black and white people shouldn't live together, but they get along, then you're ambivalent. Okay? And so based on this, they argued that racial values are homophilous. But this is how they did it. So these are how people answered the question. So first of all, they broke down black and white respondents. And then what they did was they threw out most of their data. They threw out every response from black residents on the basis they were all liberal. They threw out the category of white ambivalence. So this is the largest category of white residents. They threw out that as well. And they said liberals and illiberals over-select each other. So based on a tiny portion of their data, they argued that homophily is real. So what we've been doing is going back to the data. And what's fascinating is that there were so many different questions, and there were so many friendships across races, so many acquaintances as well. So we've been going back to this data and try to model what heterophilia, the notion that opposites attract, plus indifference looks like, right? Because there's so much more to the world than homophily, right? So how many of you know people who are heterosexual? Okay, this is impossible in the world of homophily, right? Because women should only remain with women, men should only remain with men, right? So the point is what this creates is extreme polarization. You need extreme attraction and repulsion. Now, the second thing that our group is doing is taking authenticity seriously. So there's a reason why the most authentic politician in the United States was also a reality TV star, right? And reality TV is one of the most scripted forms of TV there is. And authenticity has become the buzzword in advertising, right? So people are told all the time in order to become a brand, right? Be authentic, engage your listeners, right? So Twitter recently emailed me because they think I'm stupid. Because I have 6 followers for every tweet. So clearly if I don't tweet, it's because I'm afraid. Maybe I'm just Canadian. Right. But what we have to remember is that authenticity and artificiality have never been separate, right? The notion of authenticity comes from drama, from the notion, to thine own self be true, right? As well, users constantly script themselves. Like, how many of you think twice before you post something, especially images of yourself? Exactly. Everyone is both actor and character. We build these things. We build these roles. So we need to take this seriously in order to understand what's happening. And this is the final thing. We are looking, therefore, at how information circulates and the networks that support them. We're looking at the algorithmic scripts that authenticate and segregate users. We're looking at the actions, often online, of users that generate identity and trust. We're looking at the economic and advertising models that foster outrage. And we're emphasizing and thinking through the skeptical conditions under which trust in democracy emerges. Because we need to be critical, we need to be creative, we need to work across disciplines and sectors in order to build the democracy we deserve and believe in. Gracias.